You want to know what I'm really like, do you? Under all the glittering veneer? Well, this is it. This is what I'm really like. Fundamentally honest. When I'm driven into a corner, I tell the truth, and the truth at this moment is that I know you, Joanna. I know what you're after. I can see through every trick. Go away from me. Leave me alone.
Well, there are enough old shipmates to tell the others what my policy's always been. Reynolds, Adams, Blake, Coombe, Parkinson. What sort of a ship do I want the Torrin to be? A happy and efficient ship. A very happy and a very efficient ship. Some of you might think I'm a bit ambitious wanting both, but in my experience, you can't have one without the other. A ship can't be happy unless she's efficient, and she certainly won't be efficient unless she's happy.
Well, Michael, I gather we're going to have a little discussion about comedy acting.
Yes.
A fairly comprehensive subject.
Indeed. And you started your tremendously exciting and successful career when you were still a boy, didn't you? About how old?
11. I think, well, I started in ballet school when I was younger than that, about 10, but I really made my first appearance just when I was just 11.
What was that?
It was a children's play called The Goldfish. And Michael McClearmore and June and I opened the proceedings with a merry little trio, which was really quite overbright.
And then you came under the influence of the great naturalistic comedian of the time, Charles Hawtrey, didn't you, fairly early?
Yes,
How soon
just
was that?
immediately after that. I was engaged by an agent, Berry Stock, to go down and play a tiny part of a page boy in the last act of a play, and I only got there in time for the dress rehearsal. And I pushed all the furniture back at home, and my mother rehearsed me. And I came on and electrified Charles Hawtrey, because he'd never seen me before. I gave a sort of full-out, grand performance, forgetting that I was supposed to be a little page boy.
And it delighted Charles Hawtrey?
I heard him say to his stage manager, after I'd walked off, "Tarver, never let me see that boy again." He was wonderful. He came to me afterwards, having relented rather, and said, "Now listen, I want you to understand something if you're going to be an actor. And that is, though I'm sure you have a very nice speaking voice, but you must remember you're playing a common little boy. And so I think it'd be better if you can play it in a Cockney accent. Do you think you can?" And I said, "Oh, yes, sure I can." And so instead of doing it with these tremendous periods, I gabbled it in Cockney, and as a reward, he gave me an extra entrance.
Ah. And then you played with him a lot after that?
Then he put me into Where the Rainbow Ends, another page boy part, but a better part. He was extremely kind to me as a little boy. I can't think why. I drove him mad. He used to say, "Keep away from me, boy." I was always chattering at him. And he signed an autograph book I had, which had sweet peas on the cover. He signed it 17 times until he gave up. And then I was not allowed to be on the stage because I once made him miss an entrance by chattering at him.
And you've often said that he's had a tremendous influence on your acting ever since.
Well, he was a perfectly brilliant comedian and one of the most sensitive directors. I honestly think I've learned practically all I know about comedy playing from him, not only from what he actually taught me, but from his example.
Can you give examples? Can you say the kind of thing that you got from him?
Oh, yes. He used to watch me very carefully when I was rehearsing, and he never bullied me. I was very precocious, and I think quite a lot of other directors would have said, "Oh, shut up." But I was eager to learn, and he knew it. And I used to stand at the side of the stage watching him, and he used to teach me things. He taught me how to laugh. I remember him standing over me at rehearsal in front of the whole company and saying, "Now, boy, you've got to laugh. Now, start with this. Ha, 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 ha. But put your breath right." And he stood over me till I did it. He didn't start, and I smiled with a bit. Now go, ha, ha, ha. Then he said, "Now give way." And I went, ha, 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 ha. And that was entirely technical. And of course was an enormous help. He could laugh on the stage indefinitely. He taught me also, which was curiously enough, many, many years later when I acted with Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontanne, we always turned inwards rather than outturns, you know, to keep your face in front of the audience.
Yes.
He, curiously enough, turned his back, walked around. One used one's body. He taught me to use my hands and my arms and my body and swing them without looking as though I were acting at all.
Yes. Absolutely freely, completely at home on the stage.
That was his great trick, and it always used to infuriate me, even when I was quite young, because certain critics of the time and certain members of the public said, oh, Hawtrey's always exactly the same, implying that he wasn't acting.
Yeah.
But every time he went onto the stage, he raised his voice a half a tone to pitch. He looked perfectly relaxed and natural, but he wasn't in the least relaxed and natural. One can never be relaxed and natural. If one's a good comedian, there's too many things to think about.
Alert for what's coming from the other actors, alert for what's coming from the audience.
I think,
Alert
yes,
to the
I think
whole
that
thing.
comedy playing depends. I think you've got to have your mind working on several different levels. You've got, first of all, to remember the character you've learned and studied and know about. You've got to remember your voice pitch, which has got to reach the back of the gallery without shouting. You've got to remember your other actors, vitally important, to get their eye. Speak to them, not to the audience, to them. Then you've got to listen for the audience reaction, because audiences, as you know, vary at every performance.
Yes.
Sometimes you have an equal number of people, and one night there are a lot of cod's heads, and the next night they're marvelous. And you have to know how to handle them. If they're dull, then you've got to go a little quicker. And if they're warm and very responsive, you've got to watch yourself. Otherwise, they'll lead you astray and make you overplay. In fact, I believe that all acting is a question of control. The control of the actor, of himself, and through himself of the audience.
You said you've got to be thinking about a great many different things, your mind working on different levels. This is awfully interesting, isn't it? Because people think of it in the wrong way, don't they? They think that you're thinking now this, now that, now the other, but in fact you're thinking about them all simultaneously, aren't you?
At the same time. Always. It must be.
Yes.
Like reflexes in driving a car. It becomes so automatic that you don't, it isn't even conscious thought.
No.
But after 3 or 4 weeks of rehearsal, when you absolutely know exactly what you're going to say, you have time to listen for that telltale cough, which means you're losing attention or that somebody's got a cough.
Yeah.
But it's got to be silenced.
But while you're taking action to silence that cough, you're not ceasing to be that character in that situation, dealing with the situation of the play.
Oh, no, but by that time, it is so embedded in you that you can afford to.
You can't lose it.
But I think that the most dangerous theory advanced in modern days is the theory that you have to feel what you do for 8 performances a week. It's out of the question.
Yes.
And also, acting is not a state of being.
Yeah.
Acting is acting.
It's doing something, taking
it's,
action.
It's giving an impression of feeling. If it's real feeling, then you're very liable to lose your performance and lose the attention of the audience. Because if you lose yourself, you're liable to lose them.
You said control. If you get out of control, in fact, everything is gone.
And the most dangerous thing, you see, which happens to so many actors, and it certainly happened to me too in my time, if you are playing a high comedy part and you've got a wonderful audience, you begin to enjoy it a little bit too much. And the winks come and the face begins to react and you're having a ball. And it isn't till later that somebody tells you, pray God they do, that you were overplaying.
On this question of control and of feeling, how much one feels and how often one feels, it'd be interesting to talk about the vortex, because there was a tremendously emotional part, and I remember something Agate said in the notice of it, that it was magnificently acted, particularly by Mr. Coward, who lived every moment of it with his nerves and was so lifelike that one was in the same room with him.
As a matter of fact, Agate saw me give the opening performance at the Everyman Theatre, when I did do a tour de force of nervous acting, which was, I got away with it. From my point of view, it was not a good performance. Because I I'd had a lot of cast changes. Darling Lillian Braithwaite had only rehearsed for a week.
Good gracious.
And it was, I've been so busy getting the play on that I had not paid enough attention to my own performance. Fortunately, I think my talent saved me. And I did do it, I think, very well. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made the success I made. But about 2 weeks later, I was playing it properly, when I could turn it on at will and not feel it.
Yes. Of course, you knew that character so well because you'd written it, and obviously you'd used a good many aspects of yourself
Yes.
in creating the character of Nicky, so that it was always there for you the whole time without effort.
Yes, without thinking.
Yes.
But you see, I've got a theory which I've proved about emotional acting, as opposed to comedy, that if you're playing a very strong scene, a moving scene, there is a moment at rehearsal when your words are clear, when you know it very well, and you're really beginning to flow. There is a moment when you feel it. This is a very important moment. You cry, you overplay, but you've genuinely felt it. Then, from then onwards until the opening night, you have to begin to eliminate, because you cannot afford really to feel when you're playing 8 performances a week and are going to give that public their money's worth. Also, it is not acting.
Now, another very emotional part that you played at fairly early stage in your career was Lewis Dodd in The Constant Nymph.
Yeah.
And you've said that you weren't happy in that one, so it'd be nice to know about that.
Well, I wasn't happy in that, really, for extremely trivial reasons. Basil Dean was an excellent director, very meticulous, and of course, I was young and I'd had a lot of success, and he wanted, perfectly rightly, to rob me of Noel Coward mannerisms. I was not allowed to smoke a cigarette, because I would smoke it like Noel Coward smoked it. And he made me grow my hair very long, and I don't like long hair. And I never put any grease on it. And then he made me smoke a pipe. So every time I lit the pipe, it set fire to my hair, and we had a lot of burning went on. Added to which, it was an extremely difficult part, because I had to express in the first few minutes of the play that I was a musical genius. Well, I had some very charming music to play on the piano by Eugene Goossens, which was lovely, but didn't absolutely establish me as Paderewski, you know.
No.
Added to which, technically, the play was constructed so that I had a series of ghastly 30-second changes.
Oh.
I was in tails, in ordinary clothes, back to tails, back. So when I wasn't actually on the stage, which I was most of the play, I was gasping away at the sides, putting on my shoes and everything. And then the only really emotional part came at the very end of the play, when Tessa, gloriously played by Edna Best, we reached, if you remember, she reached for the window and had a heart attack, and I used to lift her onto the bed, gasping rather. She was quite heavy. And then the last line of the play was so touching. I used to say, fling up the window and say, Tessa's got away, she's safe, she's dead. Tears, curtain. Unfortunately, on the third performance, the window cord broke. So the window came down onto my hands. And so what I said was, Tessa's got away, she's safe, she's ow!
Wow.
Whereupon the dead Tessa looked up like that, and of course the curtain fell in roars of laughter.
Yeah. Now, do you think this, that if an actor starts on a performance from the point of view of not something, it never goes right?
Oh, no, I don't.
You don't?
No, because in later years, when I've become a more experienced and a better actor, it is essential in certain parts that I've played that I shouldn't be like me. You see, personality actor. I've been a personality actor all my life. I've established, in my early years, the sophisticated, urbane type, which is in tune with my own personality. But if, for instance, I play something which looks like me, but isn't like me at all, Then I have to reconstruct in my mind at rehearsal my gestures so that
Yes.
I'm no longer like Noel Coward. But again, you come up against this thing of the image you create in the public mind of yourself. I always, when I was a little boy and a young man, longed to be a big star and a great success. In those days, I wouldn't have cared to put on too much nose paste thing because
Yeah.
I was too occupied in somebody asking me for an autograph in a bus.
Yes. But later on, it's become the character that you're playing that's important.
Well, I've become a more experienced and a better actor. And also, acting a character is far more interesting than anything else.
Yeah.
And it's lovely to do. I'd say to do my own sort of dialogue, flippity-gibbet, witty, quick, all that, that is another sort of technique. But I loved playing Fumed Oak, for instance, with that terrible moustache. I've loved all the little bits of character acting I've done in my life.
Do you feel the difference very strongly when you're playing something that you've written or when you're playing something that somebody else has written?
I always forget when I'm playing my own plays that I'm the author.
Do you?
Yes. Now I come to think of it, yes.
Yeah.
Not at rehearsals, when I'm after the others too. But when I'm actually doing it, I can't remember thinking, no, I never thought that I'd written the play. I think it's of the two, I think, possibly prefer playing other people's plays to my own.
Really? Of the parts you've played in your own plays, the one I suppose you're really most identified with in the minds of the public is Private Lives, which must have been one of the happiest of all
It was,
experiences.
yes, it certainly was. It was a wonderful experience. You see, Gertrude Lawrence, at her best, and with me, she was usually at her best, was the most brilliant comedian to play with. She was so swift, and her eyes were so true. And it was an enchantment to work with her.
Now we've got a recording of you and Gertrude Lawrence in the most famous scene from that play.
I find it very difficult, even now, to listen to her voice without wanting to cry.
What have you been doing lately, during these last years?
I went around the world, you know, after...
Yes, yes, of course I know. How was it?
The world?
Yes.
Very enjoyable.
China must be very interesting.
Very big, China.
And Japan?
Very small.
Did you eat shark's fins and take your shoes off and use chopsticks and everything?
Practically everything.
And India? The burning Ghats or Ghats or whatever they are, and the Taj Mahal. How was the Taj Mahal?
Unbelievable. A sort of dream.
That was the moonlight, I expect. Of course, you saw it in the moonlight.
Yes. Moonlight can be cruelly deceptive.
And it didn't look like a biscuit box, did it? You know, I've always felt that it might.
Darling, I do love you so.
I do hope you met a sacred elephant. They're lint white, I believe, and very, very sweet.
I've never loved anybody else for an instant.
You see, her use of voice.
Yeah.
Her use of voice, which was instinctive. Gertie was not a thinking reed, but her talent gave it all to her. She was the most intuitive, accurate. When she did not occasionally go overboard, which she was inclined to do, but when she was on the beam, as you hear her in that. Incidentally, when this record was done, we did it in an hour.
Yes.
And we were opening that night at Southseas before we open in London. And when they sent the test to us on Wednesday, I hated me in it and thought she was wonderful, and she hated her and thought I was wonderful.
Yeah.
And we really were quite serious. We didn't want it to be put out.
Yes.
And it turned out to be a very successful record.
It's enormously moving, besides being delightfully amusing.
So you see, there was Adrian Allen, Laurence Olivier, Gertrude Lawrence, and me. And Larry had never... I hit him on the head to make him play it, because it really isn't a very good part, Victor.
Yeah.
But I wanted not to have him cast as an ordinary stuffed shirt, because I don't think Amanda would ever have married.
Yes.
I said I must have somebody who's physically very attractive. Otherwise, Amanda would never have married him. He must have something to give. He hasn't got much in the dialogue way. And poor Larry never really enjoyed playing it very much. I think he enjoyed acting it with me. We had great fun. But it really, curiously enough, did him a lot of good.
If you did anything impromptu, Do you often introduce just something new?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Only when I'm playing with experts.
Now, two of the greatest experts that you've played with are Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontaine, Designed for Living, and other things, I think, too.
We were old friends to start with, and when we were young together, many years ago, we planned that when we were all three stars in our own right, that I would write a play for the three of us. And 8 years later, it came true.
How lovely.
And we did Design for Living, and to play with those two is quite unlike anybody else, quite different. But, of course, we could experiment on stage after we'd played for a few weeks or whatever. Suddenly, Lynn would decide maybe to play by the fireplace instead of by the window. And I would be delighted because it would give me a new approach. And then Alfred would come on and find us both in completely different places and wouldn't faze him at all. We could play any way we liked. There are certain actors who like to have a thing absolutely dead set. I do not think that those actors are tremendously inspired. I think that, particularly in playing comedy, so much depends on whether your audience is with you that night. If you've got a lovely audience who are onto everything, you can take a little time off. The great thing is, I think, you as a comedian must enjoy what you're doing. I hate this new solemnity in the theatre. If anybody says to me, she's a dedicated actress, I'd like to strangle her.
It sounds,
What's she dedicated about?
Sounds a bit miserable, doesn't it?
It sounds wretched. And this means all this gloomy searching for motives. Acting must be a pleasure, even if you're playing something immensely tragic and dramatic. There is that sort of pleasure, too.
In comedy, the audience are practically a character in the play, aren't they, really? The play is only complete with an audience.
Can't do without them, and then you can't do any play without an audience.
So you've got to get them into the mood where they'll come and act with you, as it were.
Yes, and sometimes they have to be goosed a bit. I nearly always play a first act of comedy very quickly. I don't mean gabble, the difference between speed and pace.
Yes.
And if you play quickly and articulately, it doesn't give them time. You throw away laughs. Throw them away in the first act, pull them in the last. When you've got your audience where you want them, you can then afford to take some more leisurely effects. But in a first act, you've got to get their attention quickly. And so therefore play quick. And if there are big laughs, don't let them, except the very big ones. Just, if they want to laugh, stop them. In all plays I've been in, with Gertie and with Alfred and Lynn, we'd know, whoever was on first, we'd know by how a certain line went. If it got a laugh, we'd say, ha, we're home. Nice warm audience. If it got a titter, tricky. If it got silence, get to work, chaps.
Yes.
I used to give Gertie the wink, because I played the first scene of Private Lives with Adrian. And I used to come off, and Gertie was just going on with Larry, and I used to go, quick. And she'd know, and be on it like a greyhound. And by the end of the first act, we got him.
Yeah. It would be awfully interesting if you could give an example of the kind of things that you did on the stage that would suddenly change it together, you and Alfred Lunt and Lynn Fontaine.
If you remember, in the third scene of the second act of Design for Living, there's a big drunk scene. We get drunker and drunker and drunker. And one night, by accident, Alfred said one of my lines. And I gave him a quick look and replied with his line. And with one glint, it wasn't fooling on the stage. This was not jolly jokes.
Yeah.
I wanted to do some of the bits of business that he'd put in because I admired them. And the same with me. He'd seen little bits that he fancied. We switched roles. It didn't matter psychologically because we were both drunk.
Ah, yes.
So we played the whole scene reverse-wise, from different sides of the stage, playing each other's parts. Lynn happened to be standing at the side of the stage and was sweating with fear. She thought we'd dry up, that we'd fluff, that we'd giggle. We did none of those things. Only at the very end of the scene, there was a moment when I had to do rather a discreet little belch. And I knew that Alfred couldn't do a belch. So we got to that moment, and I was thinking all levels at once, and thought, what am I to do? So I answered his line and said his afterwards quickly and got back and did my little belch, and the curtain came down. And people were out in the front who'd seen the play before and never noticed the difference.
We were talking earlier on, Noel, about this problem of character, of oneself and the character you're playing, and the necessity of shedding certain aspects of yourself in order to get to the character. And I think we said that the essence of this problem must have presented itself in the film which you directed, in which we serve.
That was the most difficult thing I ever did.
Playing a man of the Navy, and yet using yourself and using all your own emotions about the Navy and what you'd experienced in the Navy.
And using other people's hands.
Other people's
hands.
Hands.
You see, I've got to be awfully careful. I act a great deal with my hands.
Ah, yes.
And naval officers do not. I was clasping my hands behind my back, doing anything rather than do a no coward gesture.
And now we're going to see an excerpt from that film.
Oh, yes, I know. We're seeing the farewell scene.
Yeah.
Ship's company, stand at ease. Stand easy.
Come a little closer. I've come to say goodbye to the few of you who are left. We've had so many talks, and this is our last. I've always tried to crack a joke or two before, and you've all been friendly and laughed at them. But today, I'm afraid I've run out of jokes. I don't suppose any of us feels much like laughing. The Torrin has been in one scrap after another, but even when we had men killed, the majority survived and brought the old ship back. Now she lies in 1,500 fathoms, and with her, more than half our shipmates. If they had to die, what a grand way to go. For now they lie all together with the ship we loved, and they're in very good company. We've lost her, but they're still with her. There may be less than half the Torrin left, but I feel that we'll all take up the battle with even stronger heart. Each of us knows twice as much about fighting, and each of us has twice as good a reason to fight. You will all be sent to replace men who've been killed in other ships. And the next time you're in action, remember the Torrin. There isn't one of you that I wouldn't be proud and honored to serve with again. Goodbye. Good luck. And thank you all from the bottom of my heart.
Tremendous.
Well, that, of course, was a terribly difficult scene to play. I think it came out all right in the end, but it was very difficult. It was a track shot. And I had to do it knowing the camera was coming near me. And as it approached, all the sailors were whisked away, so I was left out of the corner of my eye with no audience.
Talking to the camera.
Talking to the
not
air.
to the chaps.
Oh, very tricky.
Yes.
But it's, I wasn't then terribly accustomed to screen technique at all. I'd only done one picture before that, really, which was The Scoundrel, which was many years before. And I found it very, very difficult to adapt myself and not to use, particularly in that moving speech, to use too much emotion. I had to have the emotion inside and do as little with my face as possible. Because if I had, as I did it in the first take we did, I looked emotional. And that was the one thing I didn't want to do. Because
One thing a naval officer would not allow himself
no, a naval
to do.
officer, you could feel it.
Yes.
In his voice and in his heart, but you would not see it in his face.
You know, when one sees that, one's almost sorry, although you've given such enormous pleasure, that you've elected to be a comedy actor.
Yes, but in that case, I had I had a great deal on my side. I had, to start with, real sailors who all had been in action. They knew what I was talking about. I had an audience that knew. And at the end, after that finale, I had to say goodbye, stand still and say goodbye to each one of them. And I had written some things in, and I tore up my script and said, please, chaps, say what you think you would have said in this situation. And this I could hardly take. Each one of them said their own line, like, good luck, sir, you know, chin up, sir. All these perfectly trite, ordinary phrases spoken from the heart. Marvelous. Talk about improvisation.
Yes, that was.
It was nothing to do with acting. They were being, but then it was only a film and only a take. I doubted they could have got that amount of emotion in it. They'd been playing it 8 times a week.
You haven't done a great deal of filming, have you, really? Is it because it just hasn't happened like that, or because, on the whole, you don't really like it as a medium?
Oh, I do like it as a medium. I find it very interesting, but in small doses. Having been in the theatre all my life, I still cannot help loving it best.
Yes.
I found certain film experiences fascinating. I loved working with Carol Reed in Our Man in Havana. And he helped me enormously. But you see, what I always have to do as a stage actor, when I go back into a film studio, I have to unlearn in a day or two everything I've been carefully studying for years. I have to remember in a close-up not to use my lips. And I'm not a particularly adroit film actor, technically. I mean, don't pay particular attention to the camera. And Carol used to say to me, I shouldn't do that if I were you. And I'd say, what was I doing? He said, well, your mouth, your underlip in this shot is a foot wide. I was pitching to get to the back of the gallery.
Yes.
Well, sustaining, you see, you don't have to sustain in a picture. You have to sustain a character if you've got any sense. But you haven't got a long scene to play.
You're not on the stage for 40 minutes, steadily going, keeping your mind every second on it for 40 minutes or 3/4 of an hour. Or nearly an hour, as I remember that first act of The Apple Cart was, which you had to sustain.
Well,
and
that
in the
was
middle of it, 13 minutes of only you speaking.
Yes, sitting upstage, if you remember,
Yes.
with every light in London focused on my kisser. If you remember. Because we arranged that.
We hoped so. Oh, yes.
It was very... I studied that part for at least 3 months. And if you remember, we had a conversation. I said, I warn you, Michael, I am of the school that believes in being absolutely word perfect at a first rehearsal. And you said you didn't quite agree because there were certain actors who it didn't fit. And I said, over to you, pal, I will be word perfect. And there is no seagull in Jamaica that doesn't know that 13-minute speech. Because I did it hundreds of times. But I can't play a play properly. I can't waste rehearsal time by learning words.
During the process of rehearsal, you'll agree that a tremendous amount grows. I mean, rehearsal is a process of exploration. One finds out much more about the play, one finds out more about what one's going to do with every moment of it, and so on.
Yes, but how can you find out something about what you're going to do if your mind is fluttering with anxiety as to what you're going to say next?
I entirely agree.
I believe that learning a part with a postcard over the page, each cue, which I do relentlessly, it's the most awful drudgery. And if I make one mistake on one page, I go right back to the beginning again until I've not only learned it with this part of my mind, but this part.
Because one of the difficult things about The Apple Cart, for both of us, much more difficult for you than for me, it's your problem, really, was the way the play suddenly changes key in the middle. This interlude, this tremendous scene that the king has with his mistress, Orinthia, which is entirely different to the rest of the play, which is about his handing of his cabinet. I believe that you and Margaret Leighton, well, you have recorded that scene.
Indeed we have.
So now we're going to listen to a little bit of what we've been talking about.
What you need to make you a real king is a real queen.
But I've got one.
Oh, you're blind. Oh, but you're worse than blind. You have low tastes. Heaven is offering you a rose, and you cling to a cabbage.
That is a very apt metaphor, beloved. But what wise man, if you force him to choose between doing without roses and doing without cabbages, would not secure the cabbages?
Oh.
Besides, all these old married cabbages were once roses. And though young things like you don't remember that, their husbands do. They don't notice the change. Besides, you should know better than anyone else that when a man gets tired of his wife and leaves her, it is never because she has lost her good looks. The new love is often older and uglier than the old.
Why should I know it better than anyone else?
Why? Because you've been married twice, and both your husbands have run away from you to much plainer and stupider women. When I begged your present husband to come back to court for a while, for the sake of appearances, he said no man could call his soul his own in the same house with you. And yet that man was utterly infatuated with your beauty when he married you. Your first husband actually forced a good wife to divorce him so that he might marry you. But before 2 years were out, he went back to her and died in her arms, poor chap.
This was a huge move, wasn't it? From playing in your own plays and the kind of comedies you played in to playing Shaw that you did there. It was
very,
astounding.
very good for me. And I found intolerably difficult at first. Playing Bernard Shaw is a completely different experience for an actor. And in those long speeches, I had to, what I say, remember my scales. Because you cannot do a long Shavian speech in a monotone. You must use your voice without sounding theatrical, but it must hit this note, that note, that note, this. You must go up and down without appearing to. But this is not done by just standing on the stage and doing it.
Oh, no.
You've got, when you're reading it and learning it, to decide where you're going to take your voice up, where you're going to lower it, where you're going to do this. And the result has got to look as though you were doing it off the cuff.
Never seemed as though you were finding it difficult at rehearsal.
Because I knew the words, but I did not know how to say them quite accurately. It was you who gave me the clues. You gave me the clues of that part. I could have played that part off my own bat
Sure you could.
very effectively, but I couldn't have played it true without you.
Thank you very much.
It's really true.
Well, together we discovered another dimension in that character.
Yes, you
which,
told me the one
made-
thing about
made
the
it
play.
very exciting.
You told me the one thing that was important. You said, keep this in your mind. Remember, this is basically a sad man. And I don't quite believe that even Bernard Shaw was aware of that. I wish he'd seen it. I loved him so.
Yes,
I hope
so
he'd
did
approved of
I.
me. But
I'm sure he would have
I
approved
wouldn't
of
be
you.
certain, because we played that last act with sentiment.
Yes.
Now, in the original production, there was none.
No. But Shaw was not a man who lacked heart.
Oh, on the contrary, he was...
Tremendous heart and tremendous feeling.
He was so kind to me when I was a young writer, you know, before I ever met him.
Yes.
And so he corrected my scripts for me. And I'd never even met him. He took trouble to help a young actor, a young playwright. And he wrote me a postcard saying, never read anything of mine again as long as you live.
Just recently, there's been another very interesting experience for you in the production you've done of Hay Fever for the National Theatre. And it's rather fun seeing you looking so very young today, to think that you're now a classic and are performed at the National Theatre.
Yes, it's really very curious, isn't it?
Shakes you.
It shakes me a bit when I think that I originally directed it 40 years ago
With Mary Tempest.
with Darling Marat, yes.
And now with an entirely different generation of actors and with Edith Evans. So the comparison will be frightfully interesting if you can go
Well,
into
the
it.
comparison between the two stars is completely impossible to make.
Yes.
Because they were both utterly different. Mary Tempest was a great comedian, and I absolutely loved her. She was one. I was very nervous at the age of 25, showing Miss Mary Tempest how to act. And quite early on in rehearsal, she called me up on the stage and said, "Come up here, boy. You wrote this scene and know how to play it. I didn't write it and don't." And to my horror, I found myself saying, well, I think you should lift the cup when you say it. Quite right, boy, thank you very much. And from then onwards, all was well. And of course, she gave a twinkling, comedic comment performance. Edith, who is I consider to be a great actress, had, in a curious way, more stature. She did Edith's comedy, when she is sure of what she's doing, is perfection.
Before you did this production of Hay Fever with the National Theatre, you'd been in America for a time, for quite a long time.
Yes.
Yes. Coming back to the theatre in England, how did it feel after all the
It's very
experience
curious.
in America?
I must just preface this by saying that in the old days, before the war, in the 20s and the 30s, whenever I was about to do a new production in England, I always used to go to New York for a fortnight and stay at the Astor Hotel and go to every single play, because the tempo and the wonderful speed and the vitality of the American theatre was far superior to the English then. Since the war, the theatre has deteriorated, I think, enormously. Now, in England, I think the standard is immensely high today among young actors. The only thing I have to say about that owing to the dearth of playwrights, I mean light comedy playwrights, not good playwrights. There are several fine playwrights in England, but those, it's rather fashionable now to say the day of the well-made play is over. That's nonsense. You might just well say the day of the well-painted picture is over. It's silly. What they really mean is that many of them don't know enough about it to construct a play properly. But the young people, I find, owing to the last few years of the English theatre, when I think too much emphasis has been placed on the lower orders of life,
yes,
that it is now considered out of the question for a duchess to suffer labour pains. It wouldn't be possible.
Not a
because
human being.
she's got a big income.
Yes.
Now, that has made a slight bias. So therefore, all the young people have lost a certain style that we had in the old days. You see, in my early days in the theatre, in the actor-manager's time, which is certainly going back a bit, I would never go into a theatre belonging to Charles Hawtrey or Geraldine Maurier or George Alexander or Sir Herbert Tree without being spick and span, whatever I was going to play. If I were going to play a dustman, I would have my suit pressed for rehearsals out of respect for the theatre itself, the edifice, the building. You couldn't see a lot of people in denims and blue jeans and dirty old sweaters walking about the stage of the St. James's. I don't know why I feel like this. I suppose it's old hat and sentimental. It isn't entirely.
No, it isn't, because it's a
question of
respect for
discipline.
the work.
It's discipline, too. I don't believe that you can rehearse easily a highly articulate comedy if you're dressed in a slovenly manner. A young creature of 21 thinks it's perfectly all right to come slouching in without thinking of his poise, without thinking of his line, his head, stance. And now when suddenly he's put into the clothes, he doesn't quite know how to wear them. I don't blame him. I blame the directors. I think a slovenly appearance indicates in some way a slovenly mind. And I don't think you can afford to have a slovenly mind even if you're playing the caretaker.
Oh,
because that is
particularly not. It's very precise play.
Such a precise work.
Very precise.
That though you may look like a dirty, filthy old
Yes.
tramp, your mind must not be.
Oh.
And I think that there is a style in its own.
From all I've heard of Pinto when directing, he is as precise and demanding as you are. In his
Absolutely
particular way.
meticulous director.
Yes.
Every pause is
Every second.
professionally timed.
Yes.
And the net result is, I think, remarkable. I think he's a very, very extraordinary writer, but also a remarkable theatre man. But in the young, I wish I could only explain, and it sounds so almost pompous, that with the decline of manners and the decline of elegance, it is much more difficult for young actors to achieve range.
Yes.
You see, it's really, I remember when I was playing Present Laughter in the afternoon and This Happy Breed in the evening, It was a sigh of relief that I put on an old shirt sleeves and slouched on looking anyhow. It's so easy to play natural when you can scratch yourself. And even then it's got to be well done, but it's much easier than being slick, timing every line, and very sharp looking.
Yes.
And I think that's what they're missing a bit. There are certain of them who could do it, given the plays. I think that there's room for everything in the theatre. I think there's still room for a drama or a comedy or a play about kitchen sinks if necessary, or tramps, or that's fine, providing they're good enough. I also think that there's still room for a charming upper middle class family who have hearts and limbs and feel and think just the same as anybody else does. And even dukes and duchesses. There are still a few extant.
All are human beings.
And all are human beings. So therefore, to be a good actor, you must constantly better yourself. If you come from humble beginnings, you must then think, well, obviously I can play Cockney. I can play North Country. Now I must learn how to play proper English. Improve my voice so that I've got range, so that I can play Henry VIII one night and the Caretaker the next. Range is what actors should aim for. And I think that ambition has rather faded. As a matter of fact, this has been disproved occasionally by some of the National Theatre cast.
Yeah.
This is, I would say, unquestionably the greatest cast I've ever worked with in my life.
Right.
I've never had such response from a group of actors, all of whom were fine actors in their own right. By the time we were rehearsing Hay Fever, and this is what I call professional, there was no fumbling about words with them, I'm here to tell you. They were rehearsing The Recruiting Officer and the redo of Othello and another play, I think The Dutch Courtesan, at the same time. So they would rehearse with me from 10 o'clock in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. Then they'd have a break for a cup of coffee and pop on to do one of the other plays. And they kept all these different parts in their minds and were always fresh.
Yes.
And I never saw any of them when I saw the play after it had been playing for some time. They were playing it beautifully and lovingly and correctly.
Well, this is an enormously hopeful thing, isn't it? First of all, it's nice that we've got a national theatre, that with Olivier at the top of it, the company is on the whole a young company. And then you come really of another generation, work with them, and you and they feel absolutely at home together. One has a tremendous sense of the continuity of our profession.
I think the fact that the head of the National Theatre is Larry, Olivier, who is an actor from the top of his head to the soles of his feet, he keeps up the standard. He has got a very sharp eye, and he does present a marvelous example to the young ones, and he always gives them chances. Now, you see, we have in England these tremendous opportunities for good acting now, the Reps, as I said before, and the Royal Court and the Aldwych. Now, Larry inspires these young people. He's the boss. He is treated with respect as the big actor managers used to be treated with respect, though in a slightly different way because the manners have changed a little.
Yes.
But he's respected all right, and what he says goes. And so therefore, when I came in to work under him as a director, he was, of course, enchanting to me and gave me everything I wanted. But above everything, he gave me the best staff, the best stage management, and the best cast I've ever had. And I think that is more than encouraging. I think that quality of acting that I got out of those young people is the most exhilarating and happy thing that's happened to me in the theatre for many, many, many years.